We woke a judge that never slept. I was on watch when the sigil flickered through the dust. The asteroid's shadow cut across our hull, and a ghostly emblem, 3 nested scales, breathed on the viewport glass like frost remembering a hand. Our long-range LiDAR showed nothing alive in the ring debris. But the hum we felt through our boots was not in the instruments. It was in the alloy bones of the ship, a note so low it lived in the ribs. "Mark it," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Nav, give me vectors around that rock. No collision surprises. Comms. Silent except tight beam to the probe train. We don't sing out in graveyards." Rio's hands moved like careful birds across the board. Senka's lips pressed into the line she wore when she wanted to ask 3 questions, but knew I'd only answer 1. "In our aft cameras." The ring plane glowed like a broken halo. Its stones scabbed with old heat burns and etched by shattered docks. We had followed rumors and an audit trail of dead beacons into this place, and the only prize worth the fuel was the emblem crystallizing on our glass. "Power's clean," Hale said from engineering, voice guttering with recycled coffee, "but I'm pulling 10% to buffer heat. That hum is coupling to our frame. It's benign, but it's chewing margin." "We're past safe margins anyway," I said. "That's why we're here." The hum thickened as if answering. The emblem on the glass rotated with a slow, dignified indifference, aligning with the star's weak light. Arrays, sleeping somewhere nearby, adjusted themselves just enough to stir dust. A sigil, a note. Sleeping arrays. My grandmother used to tell me the saints never truly slept. They waited and kept books in the dark. Powerline, the law you run from, keeps better time than your thrust. The first civilian voice we caught was a whisper. A scavenger trawler behind a snow of chaff, half a ring away, cursing about new Navy badges and old black banners, and whether our keel was worth risking a ping. We listened because we always listened, and because you learn more from people afraid of you than people who admire you. They feared the sigil more than us. "I want a clean capture of that emblem," I told Senka. "Give me the sharpest lens. And wait." The hum modulated. It became syllabic, like something old clearing its throat, a long vowel giving shape to itself. Rios flinched as his seat shivered. Hale swore softly. The dust around the stone formed into a lazy helix, spinning to reveal a slab half buried in regolith. It was pitch black and edged in a way that refused to be out of focus. The slab was a door, but also a ledger cover. The scales on it were raised, and under them, a tiny engraving that glinted like a number. "Archivist," I said, and the ship's mind unfolded into my ear like a second pulse. "You see it." "I do." The fleet mind answered. Archivist wasn't like the synthetic voices that came with most patrol hulls. It spoke like a court reporter who had learned patience by copying centuries of testimony by hand. Signature is consistent with Concordiate-era Saint ships. Not a hull here. Mara, a gateway. The arrays say keep off in 6 languages and 3 contracts. Contracts, Senka said, breath-catching. "It's real. It's old." Hale corrected. And then softer. "And real. Powerline legends are just ledgers with better publicists." We had drifted deep into a ring yard where the stones wore the ghosts of docks. The slab's edges were bevels of night, and the sigil 3 scales nested, their beams aligned to the star, watchful without eyes. If this was a Saint ship's archive, it served a law older than the flag. The rumor we chased said such ships taught by numbers, not by threat. If you brought your accounts in order, they opened. If you did not, they closed you politely, permanently. Lawfully. Rios, I said, hold us in the shadow. I don't want anyone drawing a line between our heat and that sigil. Already holding, he said. We've got drifters at 9 and 3. One's painting us sporadically with a dirty radar. I can keep our profile looking like a sulking boulder. Civilians, Senka murmured, eyes on the side panel that translated public bands into tidy lines. A family barge. 2 kids playing static tag on the comms. They shouldn't be here. They're here because the economy forgot to make room for them. I said, keep them on the side of your eye and off the tip of your tongue. I cradled the thought of the sigil in my mind and walked toward the 4-blister. The cold at the glass made my teeth ache. The stars here seemed nearer because the light was weak and the ring was loud. Puffs of glitter drifted when the slab breathed again. It had a rhythm like a slow count. Power line, count what you carry, or the void will. Archivist, I said, we're going to ask politely. Politeness is a strategic asset, the mind said. I'll put on my gentle recorder voice. Too late, Hale muttered, and the corner of Senka's mouth twitched. We issued a greeting that was less a hail than a notarized introduction. We identified ourselves by badge and by the smaller paper that mattered more to old things, a bond registered in my family's name, signed by a county court on a planet where the city hall once kept its seal under a glass bell. The bond promised we would leave places we found intact unless invited otherwise. We transmitted it 3 times at measured intervals, the way old things liked. The slab opened by not opening. It changed context. One moment, it was a bevel of night. The next, it was a thin room you could only enter with math. The hum narrowed into a column, and our instruments lied out of sheer confusion. Then water ran somewhere inside my ears, and the air tasted faintly of copper as if someone had dropped a coin into a cup. Welcome, Mara Ellen, said a voice without a throat. It wasn't Archivist, though Archivist made a small, private noise of recognition in the back of my head. You carry a bond. You know paper. That is rare. State your rights. State your keys. State your worth. Hale sucked in air. Senka's fingers paused above the board, as if it were sacrilege to move. Rios glanced at me with the apprehension of a man who had seen doors open into sudden falls. I have the right to declare my ignorance and ask to be taught, I said, stepping close enough to fog the glass with my breath. I have the right to be accounted for, and to account for my crew. I have a key in the form of a bond, witnessed by a court that understood ledgers more than borders. As for worth, careful. Archivist whispered only for me, it is weighing tone. We are worth what we can repair, I said, and what we can return. Powerline teach me how to pay, and I will stay. Silence answered like a shutter closing on light. Then the ledger voice turned kindly without becoming warm. Teaching is costly, it said. Your bond reduces the price by showing you understand price. Payment will be taken at the source of harm. You will be required to mirror the losses you have incurred elsewhere. You will keep count. And we will keep count. Do you accept ledger tutelage? What if we fail? Senka breathed, the question escaping like steam. You will not be epilogued, the ledger voice said. You will be footnoted. Hale's shoulders shook once with a laugh he swallowed because it hurt. Rios watched an approaching set of returns with a professional chill. Antagonists at 2, he said. To cut the tension, 3 cutters. Rail signatures dirty as a pawn shop auger. Looks like the rust mendicants. They brought a preacher. You can tell by the way the lead ship's lights blink, like someone is telling them when to breathe. The Rust Mendicants were a cult hinged on a myth that saints had been chains disguised as mercy, that to be free you had to cut yourself on every edge you could find. They loved relic places because they hated them, and they hated them because they feared they would be measured and found small. Their preachers talked like lawyers who had studied at bonfires. "Open a channel," I said, "and put that family barge at the edge of our heart." Senka's eyes flicked. "On." "This is Commander Mara Ellen of CN 414. My voice filled the space between ships and hung like a simple tool on a peg. "We're on ledger business. Keep your rails in their sleeves. You're treading on counted ground." A new voice came, rich with contempt. "Ledger business," the preacher said, tasting the words like something he'd rather spit. "You brought a balance sheet into a grave. We bring fire. Fire burns dead fastest," Hale said under his breath, eyes sliding my way to see if I'd call that line a help or a danger. "Rust Mendicants," I said on the channel, "if your case is against callers, you won't find one here. This archive remembers by ledgers. It teaches by numbers. It doesn't chain. It asks." The preacher scoffed, and his ship's rails warmed. The hum from the slab sharpened into a tone that made my molars ache. A transparent plane unfolded over the ring, invisible except where dust skittered away from it. It was a courtroom without furniture and a market without stalls. Power line mirror the harm, and watch the angles change. "Archivist," I whispered, "that's a mirror plane. It's going to reflect logic, not light. Their rails will argue with themselves," the mind said, "and lose politely." The first lawful act of the relic began without fanfare. The Rust Mendicant-led ship spat a streak of tungsten toward our silhouette, and the mirror didn't reflect it, it referenced it. The slug crossed the plane and inherited a ledger entry that wasn't ours. It turned, not by physics, but by proof. It curved into the cutter's own heat shadow and shaved its antenna like a barber's lesson. The second shot, corrected, found itself docked for a past theft committed in another system. Its momentum got taxed by an invisible tariff and fell short. The third shot became 2, then 3, each a fraction smaller, until the cutter's own screen absorbed the debt like a reluctant heir. Rios let out the breath he'd been storing for a life. They're reading a bill in a language they don't believe exists. The mirror wasn't infinite. It was bounded by math the slab would explain if we earned it. The Rust Mendicants learned this at speed. The preacher howled a sermon about false balances and true knives, and his cousins tried a scatter of missiles that riffled like paper in a wind. The plane turned their logic into receipts. Small explosions dotted their hulls like punctuation. "Power line if you will not balance. The page will." The family barge panicked. I couldn't blame them. The sky had turned into a ledger and argued with weapons. They spun, trying to decide whether proximity to us meant safety or doom. Senka whispered on an open community band with the softness of someone telling a child that thunder isn't angry. It's just loud. "This is Senka on CN 414, she said. "Little ones, you are on the margin of a math the big kids are figuring out. Stay behind our shadow and play a new game. Count to 100 in heartbeats and tell me where you are when you finish." "We're at the window," a small voice said, bright with fear. "My brother is making a face." "Make the ugliest face you can. It helps," Senka said, and it did. The preacher realized the mirror plane wasn't a shield. It was a contract. He ordered a burn that would take his cutter below the plane's bound, then punch up in a knife of thrust toward our belly. It was clever in the way a street fight is clever. It also meant he would pass within a scream of the family barge. The decision pulled at me like a stitch through skin. "Rios," I said, "feed him a decoy that smells like our heat and tastes like our debt." "I can do heat," he said, hands already sketching. "Debt tastes are above my pay grade." "Archivist," I said, "make our decoy owe something small and forgivable." "I can do small," Archivist said, and the decoy blinked into being like a confession. The preacher bit. He plunged toward the decoy, hit the mirror's lower bound, and met his own owed heat coming back in little, fair pieces. His cutter shuddered and rolled. The other two had better pilots and worse sense. They tried to bracket us with a net of drones, stitching an approach corridor through the mirror's arithmetic. They were learning, and they were angry. And anger is fast, but finally dumb. Hail sent a shape into our wake that looked like a loose panel seen out of the corner of the eye. One of the drones tagged it with a paint algorithm and turned hard to follow the invented error. The net rent. The mirror took the torn line and asked who owned it. 3 conflicting signatures tried to answer. The drones stopped to argue in packets. It was almost beautiful. Powerline, argue with the page. And it makes you small. The ledger voice spoke to me again, and this time it felt like the breath before an oath. Payment accepted. It said, Lesson 1, mirrors work best if you know your angles. Lesson 2, debt is mass you carry even when you deny it. Lesson 3, statement cycles must end. I hear you, I said, and realized I was whispering the way the boys in my school whispered in the back row of civics. When the teacher produced the seal and told the oldest story, we still believed that we might be held to account and survive it. Request, the ledger said. Teach a lesson to those who cut their faces on my edges. Teach with restraint. Return costs in kind. Show the preacher what a bond looks like when worn as skin. I thought you teach, I said, and the ledger almost smiled without a mouth. I teach by numbers, it answered, but only people teach by example. Powerline, teach with your hands, not your hull. We shifted. I gave Rios a vector that would take us along the mirror's edge, boosting only enough to look clumsy and bait a pursuit that would read as easy. The preacher obliged, teeth bared, shouting that he'd carve our ledger into a crown. Hale balanced propellant like a chef balancing salt. Every gram we pushed was a gram we might need and a gram we might owe. Senka told the family barge children that the new game was blink when I say blink, and their laughter, brief and ragged, sounded like a planet's weather remembered in a tin can. We used the oldest trick that wasn't dirty. We made the preacher choose between 2 goods, a clean shot and his pride. We offered him our engine bell at 3 degrees off perpendicular. The way you offer a handshake that can be refused if a man wants to prove he's brave and not polite. He took the shot that made him heroic in his own eyes. It clipped our heatsink instead of our heart. The ship shivered. The hum from the slab amplified and then cut its own gain to keep from breaking us. Hale cursed once with artistry and then said, We just lost 15% heat margin. It's ugly but not fatal. We'll have to radiate like sinners at a revival if we push again in the next hour. Mark the cost, I said. We pay it forward. Rios rolled us so that the ruined fin presented its dark face to the stars. The mirror made a note. The preacher came around again, less eloquent now. Foam starting at the corner of his broadcast, telling his listeners that the ledger was a con because it wouldn't let him gloriously burn. The other cutters hesitated, You could feel the doubt-like temperature. Russ Mendicant second, Senka said, voice thin with the concentration of reading 3 channels at once. He's got a sister on the family barge. She's begging him to stand down. He's not answering. He's looking at his preacher like he's a father. Open him a slice, I said. Just a sliver. Let him see himself in the ledger. Archivist did something delicate. A private corridor opened, a whisper between him and us. On Rios's left display, a narrow strip showed the second cutter's captain illuminated by a personal light, hands trembling above controls smoothed by worry. He had eyes like a man who had been told he was wrong. So often he had learned to find safety in not thinking. Captain, I said gently, look outside your own heat. My fin is gone. The mirror is counting. Do you want that counted against your sister's sleep? Or for it? He blinked. The ledger voice marked the pause the way a clerk marks an empty line for later filling. The preacher shouted to cut the line, and the second captain flinched like he'd been struck. Power line, some debts are paid by saying no. He throttled down. Just a touch. Enough for the mirror to weigh him differently. The plane gave him a corridor with fewer sharp edges. His drones turned their lights off, as if to make peace in darkness. The preacher saw his flock thinning and did what preachers do when their preachment is threatened. He raised the volume and lowered the thought. He dumped fuel and lit it, not for thrust, but for spectacle. The mirror counted his waste as a theft from his own future and billed him in balance. His rails stuttered. That was when the raiders we hadn't seen decided to enter the conversation. They were not mendicants. They were quieter and meaner and didn't care about sermons. They came in from the rim with ECM that tasted like bad honey and knives that didn't throw slugs so much as leave questions sharp enough to cut. Looters. The third point in our triangle didn't wear philosophy. It wore debts with no intention to settle them. We have their fingerprints. Archivist said, almost pleased to have something simple to dislike. They cut 3 towns worth of steel in the last year and sold it to fleets that prefer not to check provenances. Mirror won't recognize their faces, Hale said, but it'll recognize what they've done. The mirror widened as if inviting them. They tried to go around it and discovered around was a line in a space where lines mattered. Their lead ship threw chaff that glittered like a lie catching candlelight. The mirror counted every spark. Commander, Senka said, tight now. We've got our civvies at risk from 2 sides. The Rust boys are a known stupidity. These new ones are an unknown. They'll shoot the barge first to teach us their appetite. We move, I said. We pay with heat. Rios. Show me kindness disguised as speed. He grimaced and did the thing good helms do when the math hurts. We burned like we meant it, slashing a curved line between the barge and the newcomers that tasted like copper on my tongue. Hale cried out the percentages like an auctioneer. 8 lost. 12. 19. The mirror didn't save us from physics. It saved us from bad faith. We still had to meet the cost square. Powerline courage is how you spend when the bill arrives. We threw out 3 decoy receipts, each registered with a trivial debt, a borrowed wrench unreturned, a library book kept too long, a meal missed and promised back. The mirror softened around them like a grandmother's smile. The looters' knives chased them and bled trust when they cut. In the same breath, the second rusty mendicant ship decided that maybe his sister was right. He rolled away, broadcasting a prayer shaped like an apology. The preacher screamed that he would brand the ledger with his name. He pointed his cutter nose first through the mirror, trying to ram the slab itself to make a point. The slab didn't move. The mirror didn't flinch. His rails went silent as the contract closed around his logic like a gentle hand. end his momentum without ending his life. I told the ledger, surprising myself with the hope in that sentence. He's wrong, but I won't make a martyr today. We agree, the ledger said, and the mirror weighted the preacher with his own words. The ship drifted, held by the softest insistence I'd ever seen. A tractor that didn't drag, a hand that didn't squeeze. The looters, meanwhile, decided we were delicious. They fanned and tried to break our appetite by showing too many choices. We refused to be hungry for their distraction. Rios cut our profile so fine that our shadow looked like a seam in the ring. Hail found us an unspent pocket of cold tucked behind a fragment of habitat wall, and we kissed it with our radiators until they sang like cooling swords. Senka spoke into the community band. A steady stream of small things count the scratches on the window frame. Tell me which one looks like a river. Tell me your brother's ugliest face again. And the children obeyed because the world is survivable if someone tells you what to do with your eyes. Powerline, keep your eyes where your oaths can see them. We needed one more move. Something that would set a precedent not just for this fight, but for the fights we knew were coming. The relic watched us. Archivist watched me. The line between my doubt and my duty had never felt so thin. Archivist, I said, how did the saintships choose who to open to? Who did they teach? They taught anyone who asked. Archivist said, but they charged fairly. They remembered by ledgers, never by callers. Mid-story lore note. For your private record, the saints preferred teaching numbers because numbers survive revolutions and fashions. Callers breed fashion. Ledgers breed patience. I want to invoke a clause. I said, the old feel of the county seal rising under my tongue. Public tutelage. Open lesson. Teach in sight of enemies and friends. Make the mirror a blackboard. Risky. Archivist said, voice becoming an equation in my ear. Teaching shows your hand and sets your price. That's the point. I said, if we hide our math, only thieves will share it. If we show it, only cowards will pretend they can't learn. Powerline teach in public. Make cowards whisper to each other. The mirror shifted again, and this time it wore writing. Not words notations. Vectors with notes on why they were polite. Mass with annotations on what was owed and by whom. The preacher's drift line was a sentence diagram that ended in a period that meant rest here. The looter's fanning approach became a cluster of parentheses, showing how their own waste would return to them if they chose to press. I am tired of being taught, the looter leader said, patching himself arrogantly into public. I will take, and your numbers will shiver. Numbers don't shiver, Hale said. People do. Fix your eyes. We made one more burn, the kind that leaves a scar in the logs, swooping below the looter's knives and then rising with a grace I didn't know our battered fin could suggest. Our trajectory crossed the family barge's plane close enough to share a shadow. The mirror's annotations kissed our path and wrote a tiny note in the corner with a date that felt important even if the star here had stopped caring about calendars. We're out of margin, Hale said, voice rough as an old staircase. We can't do that again until we bleed heat like sermons for a day. Then we'll make today count, I said, tasting copper and counting breath. The ledger purred with approval, the way an old cat approves of the child who finally learned not to pull its tail. Powerline count first, courage second, glory never. The looters tested the annotated mirror and found themselves embarrassed by how thoroughly their laziness had been anticipated. They backed away without saying they were retreating, inventing words like repositioning to replace we learned something, and it bruised. The second rust mendicant turned fully and put his bow between the preacher and the slab. broadcasting in a tremulous tone, "Our debts are not erased by breaking the scale." The preacher kept drifting, caught in a sentence he had not written. We held position. We radiated. We watched the numbers cool. Our fin would need welding and grace. Our heat sinks would need time. Our crew would need sleep and stories. The family barge kids snored into the calm in that soft, rasping way children do when fear has been allowed to leave their bodies by the door with their shoes. Powerline when the scales cool, the heart remembers. I didn't speak for a long time. The ring yard whispered old commerce. The slab sigil glowed with the modesty of a candle at the back of a court. The ledger voice hummed a silent praise to patience. Archivist kept his second pulse under my ear. Lesson 2 begins after radiative equilibrium. The ledger said gently, "You will pay with time and receive with precedent. Your bond remains your skin. Prepare your officers for vows that are not shackles." "I can do vows," I said. "Everyone can do vows," Archivist murmured. "The art is in keeping them when the next preacher arrives with cheaper promises. Powerline, the cheapest promises always charge interest later." Hale posted the scar report to the log with a fatalist's poetry. Fin 4, 90-centimeter tear. No perforation. Cosmetic ugliness rated 7 of 10. Heat margin loss now visible from orbit. Senka fell asleep with her headset on. Her last transmission an instruction to breathe like the sea hushing itself. Rio stared at the mirror's annotations and then averted his eyes as if he had been permitted to see a sacred math and wanted to deserve it next time. I stood at the blister until the cold bit my teeth into humility. My reflection was a faint thing layered over 3 scales that refused to look like anything but what they were. I thought about my grandmother's bell jar and the seal it had kept safe. I thought about teaching by numbers and remembering by ledgers. I thought about the law as a room without furniture, where you stood on your own feet or not at all. Power lines stand where the room refuses chairs. We would write a precedent here. We would say, in a way stolen from the saints and repaid with interest, that relics are not to be looted, nor to be burned, nor to be crowned. They are to be asked, they are to be taught with, and they will teach. We would say that the first cost of victory is not crowing, but counting. We would show it on a plane any child could trace with a finger. The ledger cleared his throat like a clerk calling the next case. The mirror cooled until its writing was a faint memory. Somewhere, deep in the slab, paper turned a page that wasn't paper, and a tiny light blinked the way a town hall ledger blinks when a bribery attempt has been recorded discreetly for a future hearing. We were being read as much as we were reading. Powerline, you're always being entered somewhere. Write well. The next hours were a quiet that felt like a held breath. The preacher's cutter drifted in its gentle sentence. The second rust captain sat his bow like a pen placed carefully on a desk. And the looters nursed their embarrassment by inventing euphemisms for withdrawal. We bled heat into the dark until our radiators stopped glowing like shame. The family barge spoke first. A woman's voice, very older than the children and younger than the stars, asked if the ledger would remember that they had stayed. Senka told her yes, because she had, and the ledger loved nothing more than true attendance. The woman laughed then, and the sound had a crack in it, the kind broken glass makes after the spill is cleaned and the broom has been put away. We patched Fin 4 with kit metal and resolve. Hale laid bead on bead in a pattern that looked like stitches on a rib. He burned the backs of his fingers in a way that would blister later and waved off my look with the grin of a man who had discovered pain was a teacher that did not require tuition. Rios ran the numbers in loops until the loops were prayers. Archivist watched us the way a patient judge watches a jury file back in. Curious and proud and prepared. Power line repair is a verb that spends like love. We didn't get to finish the weld before the next notice arrived. It came wrapped in proper seals, not cult banners or pirate grease. 6 vessels walked out of translation with their lights at polite brightness and their engines whispering like shoes on courthouse tile. The lead bore the austere insignia of the Concord Provincial Board for Cultural and Relic Affairs. Legalists. They feared relics because relics wouldn't be owned and won't be destroyed. They preferred to keep them in vaults where no one could earn from them or be undone by them. Archivists said with the satisfaction of a clerk pulling the exact file needed from a wall of drawers. The people who write rules for museums and sometimes forget that a museum is not the world. Put on your charm. I told my crew, and then to the mirror, prepare to hold an open hearing. You intend a public inquiry, the ledger asked, tasting the words as if it had not said them in a long time. Yes, I said, teach with numbers. Teach with a room where voices carry and are counted. Hale groaned softly. I hate hearings. Everyone hates hearings. I said, that's why they matter. They are the opposite of a duel. Powerline, a hearing is where courage sits down and listens. Civilians first. We hailed the barge and told them what was coming. The woman thanked us for not speaking to her as if she were furniture. She asked if she could watch. Senka told her watching was a right. The children asked if they could count the ships again. We assigned them that duty with solemnity. They would be our bell ringers. The provincial lead announced himself as Commissioner Lasek, keeper of seals and budgets, and protector of citizens from their own curiosity. He had a voice like a new stamp. He opened with a recital of his authority and his fear. This artifact, he said, glancing at the slab as if he wished it wore glass, is dangerous. The danger comes from people, I said, as it did when the cult tried to turn numbers into knives. He looked at the mirror plane, then at the preacher's arrested drift, then at the looter's sullen repositioning. He conceded the point by not arguing it. He wanted control. He wanted to close the room. He wanted to roll up the mirror and fold the slab into a shipping crate with 6 locks and a bribable guard. I wanted stewardship. I wanted a precedent that would let people ask and learn and be held to their asking and learning. Powerline stewardship is permission with responsibilities written in ink. Commissioner, I said, this will be an open process. We will record. We will publish. We will set a schedule and adhere to it. And we will not sell seats. He didn't like that. He liked it less when the ledger itself agreed. Public inquiry, the ledger declared, and the mirror blossomed into a long, flat table that was not a table. Names stenciled themselves at intervals board. Commander, mind, citizens, offenders, witness. The preacher's cutter drifted nearer as if called by name alone. The looters pretended they had better places to be, then edged close enough to claim they had attended voluntarily, if indicted later. The second rust captain placed his bow in the witness slot. The barge took the seat marked citizens with a dignity that made my eyes sting. Powerline when names are written. Chaos frowns. The hearing began with facts. Archivist placed a timeline on the mirror like a ribbon. Time of arrival. First contact. The mirror's first lawful act. Recorded damage hours. Theirs. Payment in the form of restraint. The ledger annotated without comment. Commissioner Lassek's aides whispered the way mice whisper when cats have been written out of the room. Civilians spoke before officers. The barge woman told how she had taught her children to count heat blooms the way her mother had taught her to count jars cooling on a kitchen table. She asked that if relics must be kept, they be kept in places where people can see them and not in vaults, where those with keys become strange. A dock worker from one of the broken yards arrived late, breathless and gray with dust, and took a seat with the furtive pride of a man who had cleaned his hands with a rag and courage. He said, when the mirror made the writing, "Ma'am, I understood ships again. I would like to understand better. Don't shut the book because the wealthy can read without moving their lips." A scavenger with 3 finger stubs explained how a closed relic became a premium your children pay when a syndicate decides safety is a product. He asked if the law could accommodate the poor without letting the greedy hide behind us. Powerline open books make quiet people loud. Witnesses after civilians. The second rust mendicant spoke in a voice I recognized as a man's first voice after leaving a room where he was constantly told the sky was a roof someone else owned. He said he had followed a preacher who had given him words in exchange for thinking. He looked at the mirror as if it might hurt him and said, "The mirror hurts less." The preacher spoke because he could not help himself. He said relics bound souls and numbers were chains with pretty faces. He said I was an agent of collars, dressed in ink. He said the ledger trapped him unfairly. The mirror printed his words in small type and added footnotes, contradiction at line 6. Unsupported assertion repeated thrice. Ignorance declared as virtue. He raged at the footnotes the way a man rages at the crack that opened under his own foot when he jumped. Commissioner Lasek used the preacher the way a politician uses an idiot to show dangers profound enough to require budgets. He proposed a provisional seizure with oversight to be negotiated later. He made that seem like generosity. He used the word temporary with the confidence of someone who had never watched a temporary fence become permanent rust. "We'll do better," I said. I proposed a charter. Not ownership, not temple. Stewardship. With terms. Public hours. Public lessons. A ledger open to named petitioners. Cost paid at the source of harm. Revenues because there would be revenues. And anyone who pretends law and learning do not cost is lying transparently managed to keep the room's lights on and the door not just unlocked but attended. Powerline, write the rules where children can reach them. Lasek said charters are for clubs. Archivist said charters are for cities. The ledger said charters are for rooms that outlive their founders. The mirror wrote the first 3 lines as if the plane itself approved. We escalated from words to proof because hearings crave both. The first set piece opened with a crowd, and we made room for their breath. Dock crews leaned on rails. The barge children pressed their noses to their viewport and fogged the glass into ghosts. A courier hissed at his scooter to behave because his boss was watching and he did not want to lose a day's pay and the cheap pride that comes with a job done right. We taught, not by preaching, by demonstration. We put a small drone under the mirror, loaded it with a recorded misdeed I had committed and paid for long ago junior ranks, hot blood. A vessel's outboard panel I had dinged by carelessness and then admitted to with a stomach full of stones. The mirror taxed the drone's motion by that weight. It slowed modestly. We showed the tax vanish when the ledger found a repair, not just promised, but completed. We showed the book open and close with honest hands. The preacher spat on his own screen and called it a baptism. The looters shifted, calculating. The citizens watched by squinting like people reading tiny print, because nobody had given them proper glasses. Power line proof is the politeness of the strong. Second escalation. The legalists tried a seizure by procedure. They filed a writ into the mirror that glowed with money and signatures. It asked to wrap the slab in jurisdiction and move the entire hearing to a room with less dust and more chandeliers. Archivists translated their writ into a process that the ledger could weigh. The ledger announced it would not leave counted ground. The mirror offered the board a seat for as long as the hearing lasted, and not a breath longer than necessity. Jurisdiction is not a suitcase, the ledger said gently. And I saw Lasek learn a new line he would one day quote without admitting where he'd read it. We advanced the charter to its core, teaching by schedule, opening by bond, counting injury at the source of injury, a ledger in public custody, fines that return to repairs, a committee that changes faces often enough to keep the room from smelling like the same old coats, a rule that any lesson learned here must be taught again elsewhere for free until the lesson is worn smooth by use. Powerline, any law not taught is just a lock. Third escalation came when the looters, bored of speeches, and itchy with the arithmetic of fairness, cut in a different way. They showed a weapon that the mirror didn't see at first, because the mirror had been watching for force, and they had chosen deceit. They broadcast a distress call in a voice they had stolen my voice, pulled from public channels, and polished until it sounded like me begging for emergency extraction. Then they knifed for the family barge while the room turned to look. We did not look away from the looters' hands. Rios saw the throttle twitch. Senka counted the nonsense in their aim. Hale yanked the fin weld hard and made a sound I knew meant the blister on his finger had just opened. Archivist changed the mirror's attention. Numbers are not gods. They need pointing. The slab's arrays cooled and then warmed, the way an old warrior rolling a shoulder before raising a shield must feel. The mirror caught the looter's deceit and wrote it down in letters so black they ate light. We moved. Harder than safe. Hard enough that Hale's report would require balm and apology. We slid between knife and bread with our hull so close to the barge's window that one child told me later he had seen his own worried face reflected in our paint and thought it was a saint. The looter knife hit the mirror's newest claws. Harm in pursuit of deceit returns with interest. Their point curled like a ribbon, then snapped back at them with the force they had intended and the shame they had not. Powerline mirror deceit. And it breaks the liar's teeth. We paid for that move. Fin 4's weld cracked along a third of its length. Hale's left hand blistered into an ugly bubble he called a medal. We lost another slice of heat margin and a portion of our ECM spool to the way the looter's blade sang before breaking. The hearing recorded our costs the way a court records an officer's bruise. Not to pity. To remember. The looter lead did not flee. He did not apologize. He spat and called us sanctimonious. He tried to hack the mirror's annotation, to graffiti his name into a place that would never honor spray paint. The mirror recorded his attempt as an admission that he knew better and chose worse. Citizens laughed. The low, relieved laugh of people who have seen ugliness be called ugly to its face. Commissioner Lasek realized then that the room had taken a shape he could either stand inside and be enlightened by, or stand outside and complain about. He asked if the board could co-sign. He asked in a voice softer than his first. He asked not with humility. Bureaucrats have to be gradual, but with a willingness to let the room prove him wrong in ways that would benefit him later. We want the board, I said. We want a signature that keeps rooms open. We want your seals. But not your locks. Seals without locks is poetry, he said. Poetry that keeps doors from warping. Hale said, "Don't knock it. Powerline seals hold rooms, locks hide them." We wrote the charter as the mirror cooled and warmed with the breath of a star. We wrote with the preacher drifting like an ellipsis at the edge of the page. We wrote with the looters glaring like beer left in a hot mug. We wrote with the barge children counting to 100, and then again because it had become a ritual that kept them from thinking too hard about knives. We set the terms with the ledger steady, impartial hand guiding ours, gently pushing us away from poetry toward clarity, away from heroics toward maintenance. Midway through the writing, Archivist whispered what he wanted. Not power, a seat, a named role. "Make me recorder," he said. "Let me keep this ledger on behalf of the people who will speak into it." "You already are," I said. "Make it public," he said. Stories only count when written, where the shy can point to them. We signed, me, as commander of a hull with a scar visible from orbit, Commissioner Lysek, as head of a board that would now have to learn how to keep rooms without owning them. The barge woman, with a laugh, that said this felt like a church done right. The second rust captain, voice trembling, renouncing the previous charter his preacher had forced on him, a document so deeply dishonest the mirror ate it, line by line, as a warning to future liars. The looter refused, which the ledger recorded as a refusal to learn and a decision to be watched. Powerline sign where your grandchildren can read your name. The preacher asked for release. He asked like a man who believed asking was a kind of weapon. The ledger considered the request the way a good judge considers mercy, with the whole book open and the cost on the table. It returned him to motion, but not to command. It required three things: a public apology, a return of stolen parts in his hold, and a pledge to stay away from this ring for a period measurable on a child's calendar. He tried to bargain. The ledger did not bargain. He complied because the mirror showed him himself, and he was not ready to see a man who chose defiance when a path toward dignity had been annotated for him in his own hand. We left the slab then, not because we were done, but because abiding is part of stewardship. You cannot squat on a classroom simply because you love the blackboard. We established a scheduled days of teaching, days of cooling, days of quiet. We left a buoy with a radio that spoke 3 languages and numbers. We left a law that spoke 1 public. We escorted the barge to a safer drift. The children, allowed to choose a course within a narrow corridor, steered like kings. The woman said, "When we come back, we will bring others, not to rob, to listen." Senka told her that listening was wealth. The woman said she was tired of being poor. Powerline listening is a coin that never rusts. We patched Fin 4 properly at a dock that smelled like hot iron and coffee with too much sugar. We let Hale sleep with his bandaged hand on his chest like a book he loved. Rios drank water as if he had learned something about thirst. Archivist asked for stories. We told them, short and plain, so the ledger would not groan under our need to be applauded. We returned to the slab on schedule. It warmed as if recognizing not our names, but our punctuality. The mirror opened and asked if we were ready for the second set of lessons, advanced annotations, long-haul debt conversions, treaties that amortize grief. It was a curriculum written by people who had believed in rooms. We stood in our suits with our scabs and our badges and said yes. We found the looters waiting at the edge again. They had brought friends and a lawyer. The lawyer made me smile in spite of myself because she wore her suit like she understood it was armor that must be polished, or it lies. She spoke politely. She argued that a relic's ledger cannot be enforced in systems where the board holds no power. She asked if we were prepared to present a case before strangers. She asked, in other words, if our numbers were portable. Yes, the ledger said. We began the long work traveling, choosing rooms, announcing hearings in markets and interstices, showing the mirror in places where people had been promised nothing but price. Some accused us of founding a religion. Some accused us of founding a cartel. The truth was duller and finer. We were building a library where books were ships and numbers were the catalog, and where the price of entry was an oath kept. Powerline teach far enough that your accents change. The third escalation came months into the work. The board suffered a coup of the bureaucratic type, a budget strangling, a new chain of approvals, a sudden love of words like provisional moratorium. Commissioner Lasek found himself forced to choose between his seat and his signature. He chose his signature and handed his seat to a deputy who wrote memoranda for a living and used phrases like best practices without irony. In response, a coalition of legalists, syndicates, and very wealthy hobbyists petitioned to classify the slab as a danger to commerce. They arranged a fleet to secure it. They brought garlands of law and a net of guns. They planned to roll the chart up and replace it with a plaque. We called an all-comers hearing. Civilians arrived with their small hopes and their large needs. Dock workers, teachers, scouts. A group of students who had used the mirror to calculate how to share water across 3 poor stations. The barge family, now traveling on purpose, with invitations to tell their counting story where counting had been outlawed by men who preferred fog. We opened with the smallest voices. A child recited the rule about paying at the source of harm. Another child corrected his sibling gently where she had counted too fast. A woman said she had negotiated a fair price with a syndicate using the ledger as a silent witness. And when the syndicate smiled with too many teeth, the ledger had printed the teeth and made them look silly. Then the fleet arrived. It moved like money. It glittered with intentions. It set its guns at polite rest angles that would take exactly 1 syllable to change. We recognize your concern, I said. My voice sounded like it had spent nights making friends with my stomach. We will not close this room. You do not own this room. Their admiral said. You are right. I said. That is the point. Powerline. Not owning is how you make a commons. They attempted a cordon. The mirror annotated the cordon as a circle drawn with a closed fist. The ledger weighed against the charter. It found the cordon wanted silence. It found the charter wanted voices. It printed 2 possible futures, a museum with a gift shop, and a school with a door. They chose to push. We chose to hold. Not with force first. With precedent. We called the cases. We called names. We called witnesses. The mirror wrote their own signatures as lines on a page. The admiral saw herself rendered not with metals, but with verbs blocked C's. Oversee. She frowned at the verbs. Her visor reflected the scales. Tactics became necessary when one of the hobbyists, an idiot with wealth and a nausea for limits, decided to teach us manners by firing a gentle beam at the mirror to make it ripple. Because he could. It did not ripple. It remembered. And it held. And it wrote him down in a margin that will follow him longer than his money will. We danced. Rios flew corridors so tight, archivists muttered calculus like a prayer. Hale bled our new heat sinks clean and promised never to skimp on radiators again when we were near rooms with laws older than ours. Senka guided small craft through larger arrogance like a shepherd pushing lambs through a fence with a broken rail. The ledger reflected force with logic and sent gifts back, tied to their receipts. Powerline reflect force with reason until reason learns muscle. We took a hit that mattered. A glancing blow from a specialist rail on the fleet's left wing clipped our ECM rack and tore a slab of ceramic from our flank. It didn't breach, but it sang. And the song was fear turned into a chore. Hale strapped himself to the exterior and rode a lift like an elevator to nail it down with emergency clamps. He came back shaking and laughing, the way men laugh when they have ridden fear down a stairwell and reached the lobby intact. We received a bruise that taught us humility and a lesson the fleet had read our playbook and hoped to beat us at our own mirror. They brought evidence. They brought people who had been hurt by relic cults. They brought women who had lost sons to ships that had taught wrongly. We did not argue the pain away. We wrote it into the ledger as a claim. We paid by returning a cost we had once passed to people who had not volunteered to carry it. We established a fund with our names on it, and not just our titles. We promised to stand on docks and explain ourselves in bad air to tired men without asking for donations. Powerline, pay backward before you ask anyone to pay forward. The Admiral's cordon eased. Not all the way. Enough. She asked how she might share credit without confessing fault. We told her to sit for the photograph next to people whose faces would not match her press kit, and to let the ledger print her verbs with ours until the words made a paragraph. She flinched. Then she did it. The hobbyist lost interest when his friends took away his drink. The legalist coalition shrank when the board, led by a commissioner without a seat, issued a public statement that seizing classrooms is how tyrants are born. The mirror cooled. The room breathed. We left another buoy. We left another schedule. We left with our fin patched and our hull uglier and our hearts heavier and higher. We made mistakes. We counted them. We paid for them. Not all immediately. Some as slow installments that will be our grandchildren's responsibility because we had chosen to write a future that would require grandchildren. We wrote our names where they could see them and make jokes and pour coffee on them and roll their eyes and sign below and above without fear. Powerline, the future is a ledger you hope to be written in. The last hearing of that season took place under a sky that looked like a bruised peach. The slab had warmed for the last time before a long cool. The mirror wrote a compact text of our precedent with the neatness of a clerk whose pen finally fits his hand. Civilians read it aloud. Lawyers parsed it and found it grammatical enough to be honored and plain enough to be quoted in docs. We stood at the blister in a row, Hale with his bandaged hand now a scar, Rios with his shoulders finally not touching his ears, Senka with the headset around her neck like a medal nobody awarded but everyone earned. Archivist humming under my ear like a friend trying not to cry in public. I looked at the sigil and thought about how rooms are built by patience and defended by the unglamorous courage of people who stand their posts and count. The ledger asked for closing remarks. It wanted a monologue. It wanted not poetry. Witness. I put my hand on the glass where the sigil's nested scales glowed like instruments left on in a quiet church. The arrays cooled with soft clicks. In the corner of the mirror, a ledger entry blinked once hearing concluded. Charter adopted. Buoy set. Schedule posted. Scars recorded. I spoke to the people not in the room, to the ones who would arrive late with a hunger that had nothing to do with knives. To the ones who hated chairs because chairs had always been taken before they arrived. To the ones who believed rooms were always closed. Here is the shape of the room. We made a table that is not a table, a mirror that doesn't flatter, a ledger that keeps names without collars. We did not make it alone. No one ever makes rooms alone. We will teach by numbers because numbers survive coups and fashions. We will remember by ledgers because ledgers make liars nervous and the honest taller. If you come to take, you will be measured. If you come to learn, you will be taught. If you come to argue, you will be answered. If you come to write, there will be ink. Power line, enter counted, leave accountable, return with others.